Well, I think I'm going to start presenting now. Maybe some people will still join, but we will have a recording. So first of all, thank you all for giving us the opportunity to present our work on the Climate Conflict Vulnerability Index here today and our approach in getting data ready for policy. So my name is Tobias. I'm working as a research associate at the Crisis Center for Crisis Early Warning at the University of the Federal Armed Forces in Germany in Munich. And I'm joined by my colleague Melchior from the Federal Foreign Office. He's a data scientist working at the Privy team there. And yeah, so the index project itself is a collaboration between the CCEW, where I'm working, and the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, as well as Truth and Beauty, which is a consultancy working on data visualization and which is responsible for building the application and getting the visuals right and doing all the user experience stuff. And the project is funded by the Federal Foreign Office in Germany. Next slide, please, Melchior. So maybe a couple of words on the project's background. So the CCVI is basically situated at the interface between policy and academic research. And as you might know, in the climate conflict nexus, there is a lot of debate in the research community that revolves around the findings, the early findings that there are correlations between negative climate change impacts and conflict and violent conflict. But over the years, there was no real conclusive finding that these are like directly linked or causally linked. And the consensus is basically that climate change is a risk multiplier, which has indirect effects on the variables that are well known to contribute to violent conflicts. And on the policy side of things, we often hear claims that climate change caused conflicts here and there, and there's some kind of a securitization going on of the hot topic climate change. And in this space, in this interface between both worlds, we're trying to position our CCVI, and we try to address the needs of the policy community, the needs for systematic monitoring of these climate conflict factors, the future risk assessments, and also provide data for more targeted programming. Next slide, please. And basically, this is where the CCVI comes in, because the CCVI tries to get all the data, put it together, and basically displays where we want to look, where interesting stuff is happening. Well, and at the beginning of the development of the index, we basically looked into the gaps that are also currently existing in the research field, and especially in the existing indices, because there are already a couple of them out there. And we identified several gaps. So we noticed that a lot of indices are operating on a national level. They are only released like every year or so. Some are just one-off products that are generated once and then forgotten basically. We also think that it's valuable to have a global index that's not just covering some kind of some areas, such as, for instance, Africa, which is always looked at when we are talking about climate and conflict. And the index, of course, also needs to be multidimensional to also provide some valuable input into the research debate. And also on the policy side of things, we know that for instance, the German Federal Foreign Office is interested in getting more localized information, more timely information that is updated more frequently, also looking at causal explanations. Next slide, please. Yeah, perfect. And based on all of that, our approach basically tries, or we are trying to map the risks of harmful interactions between climate, conflict, and pre-existing vulnerabilities. And these are our main three pillars that we are looking at. This is pretty much in line with the IPCC framework of risk as a function of hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. And we are doing this on a subnational level. So we are processing data on a 0.5 by 0.5 degree grid resolution. So we are trying to capture the spatial variation of a lot of the data that is important for analyzing or addressing the climate conflict nexus, such as climate data, but also conflict data, which has certain spatial properties that we are interested in that you cannot really capture on the country level. We are also doing quarterly updates to always have rather recent information that is helpful for policymakers when making decisions, because you don't have to wait for a whole year for another update of the data, but we're trying to have 4 updates a year. And we are relying on open source data, building our own data pipelines so that we don't have to rely on pre-processed data, because then you have a time lag again, and we're doing the processing on our end to speed up this a little bit. But what the index won't do is it won't provide any causal attribution. It won't give you more information about the causal relationships between all these variables. We are more aiming at giving a top-down view, basically, where we are overlaying the different elements of the framework, and then you can zoom in, see maybe where climate and conflict events overlap or vulnerability events overlap, and then zoom in and add your local knowledge, add your expertise to learn more about the situation on the ground. And Melchior, can you click on the user-focused design and visualization part? Perfect. And to just give you a brief overview of what the tool will look like, this is also all preliminary data that is used here, and also the design has been updated already. But the basic idea is to really have a accessible tool displaying all this information in a neat map, where you can then also look at the different pillars that I've just talked about. So the climate pillar, vulnerability pillar, see what data is influencing the scores, and then you can also play around a little bit with what you want to display, don't you want to display. And the idea behind also looking at the visual aspect of this project is that while it's great to have a nice tool which with amazing data, it also has to be usable. And I think Melchior will talk more about this. So we are aiming to really get this tool to be used in policy making and used in decision making. So next slide, please. So the last slide from my side. Just to give you a little bit more of a background of what data we are using and what the pillars are made of. So as I said, we have a climate, conflict, and vulnerability pillar. This is following the IPCC framework roughly. So climate and conflict, these are hazards. Exposure is already baked into the different indicators that you can find in the different subdimensions. And then we have the vulnerability indicator. For climate, we are looking at current hazards, such as the current situation in a specific grid cell. Are there currently droughts? Are there currently heavy precipitation events? Then we shift the time horizon a little bit, look at accumulated hazards. So has there been droughts in the last couple of months? How many drought months in the last 7 years, for instance? And then we also try to look at the slow onset hazards, the long-term view, basically, where we look at temperature anomalies over 30 years and so on. Conflict pillar, we have the current conflict status. We look at the spatial diffusion of conflict. We also look at the conflict history at a given location, and we also look at the more low-level violence conflicts, such as riots or protests. And on the vulnerability side of things, we look at, of course, state capacity, economic capacity to cope with the impacts of the climate and conflict hazards. We also try to look at vulnerable groups, especially ethnic minorities, and also we're also trying to work on getting more gender data into the index, but still work in progress, and also might look at migration pressures in the future. And without much further ado, I think Melchior can take over and talk a little bit about how the Federal Foreign Office incorporates or tries to or will incorporate the CCVI into their daily work.
Thank you so much, Tobias. As Tobias already said, my name is Melchior. I work at the Federal Foreign Office in Germany as a data scientist in the preview team, which is doing the early warning part, or early warning predictions. And we are, as said, also part of this team that builds the CCVI, even though we are not the ones actually building it. But our goal is to really get this into use. And this is what I'm going to talk a bit about today, how we envision this to be used at the Foreign Office. And to start with, I'm going to put a sentence up here, which summarizes a little bit the, I wouldn't say conflict, but the different approaches we have compared to the scientists who are actually developing this index and this visualization tool as well, is that we don't really have to land on the moon. We have to take off and we have to start somewhere. We need a consolidated view on this issue and have a lot of data being brought into context at one place, with a standardized and documented way of processing the data. And so this is really a big help to us, but we don't have to have an index that is 100% perfect. 80% is fine for the beginning, of course, so that we have something to actually work with and use for policymaking. In the remainder of this presentation, I'm briefly going to present to you guys the process, how we think about how to get this into policy, and then also 3 smaller examples of processes that we are currently thinking about using the CCVI tool for. Let me start off with this slide, which shows really the process, how we identify ways to get the CCVI into policy making. The idea is that from left to right, we have the scientists who are developing the CCVI and the visualization tool. And on the right part, we have preview and the German federal government. Preview is acting as, I would say, a bridge builder between the scientists, the scientific community that we are using for building this, and the practitioners at the German government who we want this to use. The different departments, foreign missions at the Foreign Office, plus we have other ministries that we also want to use this tool in the end. What do we do, or what's the key on how to get this into policy making? It is to include this in the policy generating process, as I call it. I don't know if it's a widely accepted term, but it's a term that makes sense to me. And for that, we need to first identify some of the key users that might be using it, and then also the processes that they are using to make policy and to make decisions right now about funding and everything. And once we've identified this, we can then go back to the scientific community, translate this into things we need to include in the CCVI to make the information that we display actionable. This is really what this is all about. But we are more than, we have access to the policymakers, and this is why we are trying to collect the information, translate it back to the scientific community, and then together work out how we are actually going to use this. There are 3 different policy generating processes that we are currently thinking about using the CCVI for. The first one are climate security briefings that we are doing for our embassies. The second one are funding versus risk analysis that we are doing as well. And then also for our global risk scanning at the Foreign Office. I will go into more detail with all of these. First of all, let me start with the climate security briefings. So until now, these climate security briefings are done by our security team at the Foreign Office, who are presenting mostly qualitative studies to the foreign missions of Germany. And they are trying to present the embassy or the foreign mission personnel the current climate security challenges that their respective country are facing, and discuss with them how they view it, of course, and then also how to address these issues. And into this, we want to bring the CCVI for many reasons, but I've listed 3 down at the slide. First of all, it's really nice that we have a comparable metric, so or comparable data. So we can compare the country to its region, because in the end we have an index score that we can really compare across space and time, which is really interesting. We are also adding a multi-dimensional view, so we are stacking these 3 dimensions on top of one another in one map, which is really nice to see, because usually when we have qualitative studies, they highlight one aspect and really go into detail, which is great. But if you really want to get a good overview over where the risks lie in your country, then it's really important to have it on a map and have a good overview that we are providing with the CCVI. And then, of course, also if we want to extend the analysis, we have one place where we can get data and extract the data from, which is also really good for us. There are, of course, some challenges for this. First of all, the first question is always, can we include the IPCC scenarios in here, which I think is also planned for the CCVI and in the future. But it's difficult to get it in there, and we're not there yet, so we always have to say no. And then also, what is really interesting for us, or for everybody really here at the Foreign Office, is adding impact layers as an overlay. So we have the 3 climate, conflict, and mobility layers, and then also add a layer that shows the GDP, the demographics, infrastructure, natural resources, and so on. So then you can really see what is impacted, or even how much is impacted, so that you don't just know where the risks lie, but also whether this risk really endangers some of the core interests of that country. Plus, we will include rather sooner than later, as I learned from Tobias before, the development over time, which is also, of course, really interesting for us to track these metrics over time and then really show drought over time everything, which is really going to be interesting for the embassies. Second, the second process that we are thinking about is the funding versus risk analysis. Really simple really simple terms, we fund projects in the world, and we want to fund projects where there's a lot of risk. And in order to prevent these risks from materializing, because then it gets much more expensive. And so we need to have a clear understanding, okay, where do we invest our money, and where do we fund projects, and where are the compounded risks. And so we want to add this internal German Federal Foreign Office information about the project funding to the CCVI at some point. And then also, this would be nice because it would give us some benchmarking for policy making on project decisions, which is very nice, because otherwise it can be quite difficult if you only rely on qualitative measures. There are, of course, some challenges here as well. So first of all, the project location doesn't really or necessarily mean that the effect, the positive impact of the project is in the exactly same location, right? So you could have a project that's located in the capital, but actually does a lot of work in at the border, for example, and we have to figure out how we deal with that. And then we at some point have to integrate the data from the CCVI into the IT infrastructure at the Foreign Office to make sure that we can harmonize it with our project data. But that's more of a technical challenge that should be solvable. And then also the last part is our global risk scanning that we do at the Foreign Office. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. We look at the world and look at where we consider risks to be present and potentially emergent at some point. And so we want to include this CCVI as well here. This again gives us a really nice comparable metric or data with a lot of local contracts, which is nice. Plus we have the sub-annual update. This is exactly what Tobias talked about in the policy view. This is really important to us that we can not just do this once a year, but more than once a year. Plus we have a metric that we can track over time, so we can see, okay, did something change in the last 3 months, which is also really nice and hard if you only rely on qualitative information. Right, and then this last part, or the challenge for this last part, is it's not really 100% clear how we do this at the end. So we need to determine this with the users of this risk scanning, what they actually need, what they want. But this, just to come back to this, we don't have to land on the moon, we just have to take off. For us, this is a really big step forward, because so far we're working a lot with PDFs, Excel files that are just flying around everywhere. It's not that bad, but just for emphasis. And now we have a really centralized tool, which gives us a lot of flexibility that we didn't have before, and also one single source of truth. And this is going to be, I think, really helpful for us in the Foreign Office for all these processes, and hopefully more that we will identify in the future. That's it from our side. If there are any questions, then feel free to ask them. And thank you for all your time.
So I wanted to, this is Robin Myers. I am from the State Department. I work in the Office of Foreign Assistance. And I just want to thank you for this. It was very nice to see this presented, because I am the data team lead. So we have the same problems, and it looks like a lot of the challenges that you guys have of putting together our data, aggregating it, getting it out there into a central location where folks can then utilize it and be able to make it useful for policy decision making. And then also for our front-facing foreignassistance.gov site. So I do appreciate it. It's good to hear that other folks have the same challenges. And maybe I apologize, and I might not have fully understood. So in your funding versus risk, I didn't hear when you're going through the steps of trying to get more of your policy, or maybe that might have been the one that was higher, the policymakers more involved. Are there certain things that you are creating for them? Are there ways that you're getting them involved in actually building out the dashboard itself so that it's more useful to them? I'm just trying to figure out, because that's one of the things we too have a problem. It's like people are siloed, and we're trying to make things more useful to our policymakers, and it's one of the challenges I think we all face.
Yes, first of all, thanks for the question. I can confirm that we have similar issues with the silos, sometimes at least. But we are getting people involved, so we are doing user interviews and getting them to use the version that we currently have, get their feedback. plus what I do a lot as well, because this climate security nexus is my focal point, as we call it. Here at the Foreign Office, I talk to the people we identify as key users a lot. I go to lunch with them. I present the current versions of the CCVI over and over again and try to explain to them, okay, this is what we're going for. What do you think? And usually, at least my experience is that if you present it to them in a large group, then nobody says anything. But once you get them on a more personal level and they're the only one in front of you, so if they're not responding, then it's a bit awkward. Then they will usually talk a lot, and they are, at least here, they are really interested. We have a lot of people who really think this is a good idea. And so this is what we're trying to do: structured user interviews, and then from my side, really trying to make it personal. So trying to talk to these people a lot, that we want to use the tool, and get lunch once in a while and explain everything.
Okay, I mean, is there ways that you measure that they are actually utilizing it?
So far, maybe this wasn't clear. So far, we only have a prototype, so we don't have a productive system yet. Once we have a productive system, we have to see if we can measure that, because Germany has quite strict what is it called, laws against tracking,
data protection laws,
data protection in future years, yeah. And so this might get in the way, but yeah, we have to see.
I just saw one question in the chat from Zach. So maybe I can talk a little bit about that. So we are really not looking at forecasted phenomena right now. So we are really looking at what's currently going on, what was happening in the past, and we are really looking at the very basic data. So for the droughts, look at precipitation data and so on. And we don't have any forecasts in our tool yet, but we are also trying, or we are thinking about doing this in the future, incorporating a little bit more complex model data as well. But currently we are really looking only at observational data for now to get started. But yeah, I think that's something that we definitely need to take into account in future iterations of our climate pillar. But right now we really try to build like the basic building blocks to get the tool started, and not to add too much complexity, because then it's also harder to communicate to the user what this means then for a certain grid cell and so on. And so yeah, right now this is not part of the tool yet. But thanks for the question. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions?
I mean, I think we are also running out of time. So
Exactly.
maybe Matthew, I don't know if you want to say a couple of words. Maybe from my side. So if you have any questions, you can also just contact us. I'm not sure. You can probably find our contact details somewhere in the program, and you can just shoot us an email, and then we can also get back to you. But from my side, thank you for listening, and Melchior.
yes, you've said everything. I don't think I need to add anything. Feel free to message me, of course, as well, if you have any questions or want to have a more detailed talk, then you can also arrange that.